You're watching BATV, bringing Brookline home.
Hello, I'm Karma Kitai, and I'm your host for Alivelihood, New Adventures as We Age. As you might know, if you've seen other of our shows, I interview people over age 50 who've started some new adventures in their lives. So today I'm going to introduce you to Andrea Fleck Clardy. And she has had a number of transformations in her career. Starting with publishing, and she now is writing short plays. Let's find out about it.
Hi.
So welcome.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. So I was very interested to hear about you. We talked the other day. So I know that you were in writing and PR and marketing in your earlier life.
That's right. That was pretty much my professional life. I worked for a sequence of publishing companies, all kind of special interest, either scholarly or socially focused. And the last in the sequence was Cornell University Press, where I worked for about 10 years. And then we moved to Boston, and I continued to work as a freelancer for a while. But I've always written, as you suggested. I had done a variety of different kinds of books, and I have always been interested in theater. So it felt like maybe it was time to combine those interests and start writing plays.
Yeah. So we're going to hear about your playwriting, because I know that that's an exciting piece of your life right now.
Very much so.
Yeah. But let's just get a little background about your writing before theater. Okay, because I know you published a number of books on different topics.
I had written a newspaper column in Ames, Iowa, when we lived there for a number of years, and those were collected in a book that's a kind of a snapshot of life in the heartland. And also in Iowa, I wrote a children's book about the accidental death of a child. And
what is the name of that book?
Dusty Was My Friend.
Dusty Was My Friend.
And I tried to get it published, and it was very difficult because it was a little ahead of the wave. It was long enough ago that there weren't any books really for children about the topic of death. So it didn't get published for quite a long time. Well, it was published in the 80s. I had written it 8 years before that, I think. And was finally published by Human Sciences Press, a press that really serves teachers and psychologists and professionals, because it was considered a niche book, a book that had a market only with people who were helping children deal with this issue. 10 years later, there were a dozen books that tried to give people a little bit of structure for sudden grief. So that was the first one. It was illustrated by a friend of mine in Ames, Iowa, who was trying to get started as an illustrator. And she did. She went on to a career in illustrating. And then when we were in Ithaca, New York for many, many years, I did 2 books that I edited, merely books of photographs more than anything else, about Ithaca and about the small communities around Ithaca. And then also,
and it's a very beautiful area.
It's a beautiful area. And the first, A Sense of Place, the Ithaca was the first one, and that just showed Ithaca with all its waterfalls and gorges and slightly radical people. And it was kind of I was involved in an arts festival there, and this was kind of a tribute to the community that created that arts festival. Then I did the Small Communities book, interviewing people who lived in the little, quite rural towns around Ithaca, and again illustrated by local photographers. And then I also, in that era, wrote a book that was a kind of guidebook for writers to feminist and lesbian periodicals and presses, called Words to the Wise. And that, it was an era when there were women's bookstores and feminist periodicals, and all of that was very new and exciting and hard to access. So it was a kind of guidebook for that.
Yeah. I think I mentioned Our Bodies, Ourselves, which you said you know about, of course.
Yes,
right?
and when the first publisher I worked for, Crossing Press, did a book called The Whole Birth Catalog, which was partly indebted to the Whole Earth Catalog and largely indebted to Our Bodies, Ourselves. It was a kind of catalog of all the information about birthing.
Yeah. A friend of mine named Joan Ditzian is one of the founders of
really?
that collective, and she's been interviewed here too.
And Judy Narsigian, do you know her? She's also still in Boston.
No,
she was one of the...
No, but I know there's a whole group of them from around Boston. Yeah, so...
So I had done lots of different kinds of writing and over the years.
Let me ask you, what got you interested in writing books for children?
I have some. And when my sons, we have two sons, and when they were little, they were the source of a lot of the best ideas for the column I wrote. And Dusty Was My Friend was based on a real incident. A young friend of my children was killed in a car accident. And the book I really borrowed from them, particularly my younger son, who struggled with the reality of someone being suddenly gone. And we talked about it a lot, and most of the best lines in the book are his.
Oh, wow, how serendipitous.
Yes, and
how old was he when the child died?
He was 6, and although in the book he is, I think, 8, because the publisher said that 6-year-olds wouldn't say that. So the fact that he had was neither here nor there. The family of the real Dusty was sort of in on all. I had written a newspaper column first, and then I had shown them the manuscript, and they were actually very eager to see it published, just so that there would be some good could come of this completely senseless tragedy.
Okay, and fast forwarding for a moment to your plays, I know you also have written plays for children.
Yes,
right?
I wrote one play, one children's play, and I would have told you that was about the experience my children had in moving, because we moved from Ames, Iowa, to Ithaca when they were quite young. More or less the ages of the kids in my play. And then we left Ithaca, although at that point both of them were grown. In reality, I think it's a play about my experiences in leaving the familiar more than theirs. And children are we're just the vehicle for saying what grown-ups have a harder time saying.
I don't want to leave my friends.
That's exactly right. It's very scary to go where nobody knows who you are.
All right, are people going to like me?
That's right. And you know all the secrets, you know all the best places to hide, you know who all the good teachers are, and you know who you can count on. So that was the set of experiences that I wanted to deal with. And also, my children's play is a play with songs. It has music. I did not do the music, but I have had a gifted friend who had a lot of experience writing musical comedy. Clark Gessner, who wrote the You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown, was a childhood friend of mine. And I was really asking him for advice about getting someone to do the music, but he decided it would be fun to do it. So we did it together.
How nice.
It was very fun.
Right, so that got to be very professional then,
Yes.
as a musical, huh?
Yes. And then it was performed in Ithaca at their children's, they have a program called Kid Stuff, and they did it there. And then it was done again in Ames, Iowa, where I have a friend who has a children's theater program, Carol Horowitz.
Right, and we have a small clip from that play.
Okay, it's called Hide and
the
Seek.
musical, Hide and Seek. So why don't we play that?
That would be great.
What's up, Mom? We're playing hide and seek, and it's not even starting to get dark out yet.
Allie, can you sit down for a moment?
I'm in the middle of a game.
I know, but this is really important. Well, I just got a call about that job in Chicago. It sounds very promising.
That's great, Mom. Sounds good.
Can you go now? Hold on. Focus for a minute. Focus. They're going to offer me the job. The job is in Chicago. Well, we have a lot to talk about.
Wait, what are you saying? Are you saying we would move to Chicago?
I'm saying that that's a real possibility.
Chicago? Are you kidding me? We can't do that. We can't live in stupid Chicago.
Allie, listen for a minute. You know, I'm just as upset about moving as you are.
Do you? Sounds to me as if you've already made up your mind. How come you get to decide? Don't I count?
Of course you count, sweetie. How you feel is very important to me. This is a decision that we need to make together. It's a family matter.
Here we are, all free, together again. All of us.
I know, it would be really hard for you to leave your friends.
I'm hiding. All curled up. I'm hiding.
Well, let's give it a try. People there will like you too.
Disappearing is nice. Being cats and mice. I'll never run for the maze. I'll just stay where I am in my special place.
Allie.
Hiding. All alone, just hiding.
Allie, are you listening?
Sort of. May I go back and play now?
Okay, sweetie. I guess you can go back and play. We can talk again tonight.
That young girl has kind of a presence with
Fabulous.
her voice,
She
doesn't
was
she?
amazing. The children of Ames, Iowa are blessed to have children's theater because that program has very, very high expectations, and it has brought out a tremendous amount of talent. They did an amazing job.
Is Ames a small town?
Ames is a university town. Iowa State University is there.
Okay.
So it's, I mean, it's small by Boston standards, but it's, it has the advantages of having lots of people who have come there for the school.
Right. Well, it reminded me, which I totally forgot, that when I was in the last couple of months of 7th grade, I had to move. My father had got a new job.
There you go.
Yep. And we had been living in Troy, New York, upstate New York, and going to the wonderful city of Toledo, Ohio, which I thought,
that's quite a transition.
that's so big.
Right.
And it was a huge transition because when I was in Troy, I think I was still playing with dolls and playing house in the backyard with the neighbors. And all of a sudden in Ohio, kids were teenagers,
Right.
wearing makeup and stockings and high heels.
It's tough.
Whoa. Yeah. Okay, so you're saying though that maybe in part that play was an outcome of your own
That's
needs.
right, and I think that it's a play that deals with transition, and it has that in common with a lot of the other plays. A lot of the plays that I've been interested in writing are about difficult choices, about moments when your whole world shifts. I mean, that's a little bit of a stretch, but if there was one kind of overarching set of themes, that might be it.
Right, yeah, so that gives that tension.
Right.
That,
right.
draws people in.
Right, and it also is, theater's about surprises, and you get settled in to a certain town or a certain job, or being a certain way in the world, or being of a certain age, and things change, and they change sometimes quite suddenly, and that's sort of the theatrical moment.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay, so you haven't done any acting yourself?
Yeah, I
though?
did when I was much younger. When I was in high school and when I was in college, I did act a lot.
Okay.
I was very interested, and I worked one summer in a theater, and I've always been particular. There's something about theater that just is magic to me, live theater, and I felt that way for as long as I can remember. And writing plays and seeing them performed is a whole other dimension. You know, on the one hand, at its best, to see something that you wrote sort of come alive is extraordinary. And the play kind of belongs to the actors. It also kind of belongs to the director. So there's something inherently collaborative about theater that's very exciting. It's sort of the opposite extreme from the poems that I also used to write when I was much, much younger and hide away, never to be seen by anyone. This is the other end of the spectrum. It's meant to be shared. And that's been very exciting.
Yeah. So I think you told me that you've had some wonderful moments in watching your plays being performed, and a few little disasters.
Definitely a few little disasters, but you know, that goes with the territory. You're asking people to memorize a whole, every word you wrote, and things go wrong. Things go wrong technically, people lose their lines, people imagine it very differently from the way you imagined it, and there are constraints. So, for example, I have a play that is about a middle-aged, middle-class white woman who likes to shoplift and who encounters in the probation office a young African-American man who actually has never shoplifted but who has been convicted of it. And the play is about their dynamic. So it kind of requires an older white woman and a young black man. And it has been done a number of times. It was done in Colorado Springs in a small short play festival where the playwrights just arrived in time for the performance. There were 6 of us. We didn't have anything to do with the production, and I found that there really weren't young African American men who seemed well suited, so they had cast an Iranian man, youngish. Not so young, youngish. And on the theory that for
Not
people,
as young as you
but
conceived
for
of
people,
it.
what the director said, and he was excellent. He did a marvelous job, and her argument was that the dynamic between someone who's always watched, who's always suspicious, you know, who's always greeted as if he was a danger, is sort of the same in Colorado Springs if you look like you might be Muslim or Arab, as it is in an East Coast situation. And it was done in England, and they asked me whether they could use hoodies, kids who were clearly lower class and who were suspect in the same sort of ways. And so, you know, there are things like that that are situational. It's fine. I have no problem with that. When the lines disappear and you can see actors up there looking panic-stricken and you're sitting in the audience dying.
You want to give them the line,
Right, because I know them all by heart. Those are tough moments. But there are 30 wonderful experiences for every bad moment.
Well, that makes it all worthwhile, I'm sure.
Really.
Yeah. Well, I never acted as a kid.
Didn't you?
No. I don't think I ever thought of myself as being someone who could be on stage like that.
But there you are, right now.
There I am. However, in the last few years, I started taking some improvisational theater classes, which I love.
Good for you.
But I always think that it's much, much harder to have to learn lines.
Yeah.
But the people who had a lot of trouble with improv are people who are actors.
Interesting.
Yeah.
They're used to learning the lines.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and maybe they felt they could sort of hide behind the lines or being in somebody else's character. Whereas if you're doing improv, you're more drawing from yourself. Although I've heard that acting coaches, really counsel people that they have to get somewhere inside to really portray a character, no matter what it is.
Right. I think that's probably right.
Yeah. Right. So tell me, I know you've been doing these very short plays.
Well, I've been doing short and very short. The largest number have been 10-minute plays, and the reason for that is that there are lots of 10-minute play contests. And although I had
never heard of that.
Right. Well, it's the sort of thing you wouldn't know unless you were interested in being involved. Boston is actually the home of the Boston Theater Marathon, which is one of the great festivals of short plays. Once a year, Boston Playwrights Theater and BU sponsor a festival. They have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of short plays sent to them. They choose 50. And maybe 8 or 10 of them are written by sort of locally famous or really famous theater people. But the rest, the other 40, are chosen from the hundreds that are sent in through a very complicated process that I could tell you if you were interested, but you probably aren't. And they come down to, they in the end have 50 plays, and there are in fact 50 theater companies in and around Boston. They each choose one play, also a complicated process, and then they present them in the Calderwood Pavilion of the Arts from noon until 10 o'clock at night on a Sunday in the spring.
Where is that?
In the South End, on Tremont Street.
Of Boston?
Yes, of Boston. And it is, if you're at all interested in 10-minute plays, it's an extraordinary opportunity because you buy a ticket, you can come and go. And in the years that I've had a play in the marathon, I've had friends and family there, and so after my play is over, I have left. But in the years when I haven't had a play chosen, I go at noon and I stay till 10. And there's an enormous range. But in addition to the marathon, there are many, many, many plays all over the country, and contests where on some basis or other a selection is made. So there are 10-minute plays. Then there are the shortest play contest I've ever been in were the 1-minute plays. There is an online, it's called GI 60, Gone in 60 Seconds, and they choose 1-minute plays, and they are performed, I think they are performed in Brooklyn, but they don't encourage playwrights to come to the production because they're almost immediately available online. So I've had a play chosen for that. And then I've written some things. I have a monologue that will be done in Somerville, Mass. in late January. They're doing monologues and short and very short pieces that have to do with equity issues. So it's a however, I have just recently finished writing a full-length play. That hasn't ever been produced yet.
So why don't you talk about the topic of that play?
That play is about a likable guy who's worked in computer sales and is in his late 40s. He has a mother who has dementia to whom he's devoted. He has a father who is a baseball fanatic, and he has a wife who's a nurse and a daughter in high school. He loses his job, and it's in a funny area. It's not quite clear whether he quit or he was fired, although we see what happens. It's still hard to say. But in any case, he's unemployed and unable, despite his desperate efforts, to find anything like a comparable job. And so the play is about what happens to him and what happens to his family. How their interactions and communications are altered and changed, and how the family dynamic is changed. in his struggle. It's really about, in part, how much we are defined by the work we're paid to do. So anyway, it isn't quite as grim as it sounds. There are some funny things about it. It doesn't have a tragic ending. Although Death of the Salesman was one of the plays that I read and reread in thinking about it before I got it written. I also read a lot.
And that's not a fun
That's
play.
not a fun book. One of the publishing companies I worked for before I was at Cornell University Press dealt with labor issues specifically. ILR Press. It's now part of the Cornell Press. And they had a book about called A Company of One, about people in these fairly high-tech fields who get laid off in their 40s and 50s, and some of the struggles they encounter. So those were the, I did a little research into those areas before writing the play.
It also sounds as if you, in order to be successful at these kinds of plays, you have to be pretty deep and sophisticated in understanding human behavior and motivations.
I think that it always, I suppose it helps. Writing the short plays was a terrific way for me to sort of get started. It's still the case, I gotta say, when I have finished something and don't quite know what it is I'm going to do next, there is a moment of looking at the blank screen. It's not the case that I have so many fabulous ideas that it's just a matter of finishing one and diving into the next. It's very much a start and stop process, and the part of writing plays that I like the best, I like the production, but I love it when there's enough written that I know it's good, I know it's worth doing, and now I can go back and
you kind
rewrite.
of know the story and the characters.
That's right.
Right.
I worked with a coach, a woman who is a much more accomplished playwright, and she read the full-length play and sort of gave me comments and suggestions. That was extremely helpful. The theater is a pretty collaborative community, and there are lots of playwriting groups. And I took a course at BU. That's part of their MFA
Boston
program.
University?
Yes, that's part of the Masters in Fine Arts program in playwriting. So there are a wealth of classes and collaborative groups available.
So it sounds like it's not so much a dog-eat-dog world as it is in film.
No, I think that's
movies.
right. I think people are supportive of each other, and I haven't worked in film, so I can't really say about the comparison, but I think I have found the Boston theater community to be extremely generous and collaborative. The reading, my play, I'm going to have it read by really excellent actors, and they're doing it because they believe in helping new playwrights get going, and they know each other, and it's fun, and I'll feed them at the end, but they're doing it out of the goodness of their hearts. I don't think that's about me. I think that's about the quality of community.
So we don't have very much longer, maybe just a minute, but I'm just curious about sort of how this fits into your life. I mean, is it something that you wake up in the morning and you have a structured time that you write?
I do. I try to write every day in the mornings. I get up very early. I just happen to, and then I do other things, in the household, and then I go for a walk around around Jamaica Pond. The great good fortune to live right next to a pond that it's about a mile and a half around, and that's very much focus time for me. And then I come back and then I try to write, or not write, or think about writing, or unwrite, or rewrite for a few hours in the morning.
That's your best time.
That's my best time. If I am well along in something, I get back to it again and again during the day. It's getting started that's hard.
Right. Well, this has been really fascinating to hear what you do, and I don't know that we've had any playwrights here before
Well,
on
it's
A
a pleasure.
Livelihood.
I appreciate the chance to talk about
And
it.
I would be very interested in seeing some of your plays.
Great. Well, I'll let you know when
So-
they're going to be on.
Yeah, you'll have to put me on your mailing list.
Definitely, I will. Thank you.
Thank you for coming, Andrea.
My great pleasure.
Okay, so join me next time when I will have a new guest for you on A Livelihood, New Adventures as We Age.